La 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 la. Ooh, la 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 la. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Westchester Culture. I am not Bob Johnson. My name is Joan Grosgenois Thomas. Bob Johnson was kind enough to allow me to sit in the first chair today to interview two guests that I have with me. It's still March. It's still Women's History Month. And so with us this afternoon in the studio are Aleksandra Chancy. She is the principal of DAC Consulting, a construction project management firm based right here in White Plains, and they are celebrating their 25th anniversary this year. Aleksandra was born in Haiti and first came to the U.S. to study engineering at the University of Miami in Florida. While there, she earned a dual degree in architectural engineering and civil engineering. Ms. Chancy then went on to earn a master's of structural engineering from Purdue University. Welcome, Aleksandra.
Thank you, Joan.
Our second guest, who is joining us via Zoom, is Nicole Hollant Denis. She is founder and principal of Aris Design Architects. She is an award-winning architect. Her 30-year career in architecture and design has ranged from developing the historic African Burial Ground Memorial, and designing Harlem's first indoor plant living wall for Columbia University, to renovating MetLife's Fifth Avenue offices and building a permanent hurricane and earthquake-safe house community in Haiti. She is a graduate of Cornell University, a licensed architect, and holds a master's in design studies from Harvard University. Nicole is also of Haitian descent. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Joan. So very happy to be here.
And for our audience, I too am of Haitian descent. And so this is a very, very special opportunity for me to meet and talk with these dynamic women. So thank you both for joining us today, for joining me.
It's great to be here.
If you recall, when we first spoke, the reason that I wanted to talk with you both specifically is because of an article that was in the New York Times in the beginning of the month. This particular article talked about the lack of people of color and Black people that are working in the development and construction industry. And so there is, dotted lines certainly between project management, construction project management, and architecture, and development. And so I was very curious to hear from both of you, given your respective numbers of years in this industry. Architecture as well as construction project management, I'm sure doesn't have very many women, much less women of color, leading firms. So let's start with you, Aleksandra, and tell us how you got started in this business. How did you start DAC Consulting?
How did I start DAC Consulting? Well, pretty much I did design work, engineering, and then somewhere along the way I had been to a few sites as an engineer, going out to see what was going on at the site. It just seemed to be very dynamic, to be more on the construction end of it. Mm-hmm. So then I joined a construction management firm, and I worked on several buildings, overseeing the construction of projects from the ground up. And then in 1997, I decided to go on my own. Actually, I left the company hoping to go into development. But as you say, it is such a hard industry to penetrate that I decided to stay in construction management, and that's what I've been doing for the past 25 years. I love the idea of development. I think real estate development is very exciting, but I think there's so much money involved in it. And it's almost like I would say a lot of people that know each other, they just sort of work together, and they make it very difficult. I don't know if they make it difficult for people to penetrate on purpose, but that's just the way it ends up being.
Understood.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as in the construction field also, I mean, it's always been a male-dominated field, so it has had its challenges, but at the same time, I always say, and I'm sure Nicole could say the same thing, when we walk into a room, when we do well, people notice us, right?
Yes.
So that's what I tell myself, and luckily, usually that's what happens. People tend to remember, and then they, I have people who call 10 years later and say, hey, I met you in such and such a place. Would you like to work on this project for us, or would you like to propose on this project, which gives us an opportunity. But definitely there are challenges. Yes.
Wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful. Nicole, I'll put the same question to you. How did you get your start as an architect?
So I love that question. I love talking about my start. As a little girl, I was always interested in art, and I actually wanted to be an artist. I had no idea. Didn't know anything about architecture. So my parents being from the Caribbean, like you guys know, my father's from Haiti and my mother's from Martinique. They said as first immigrants here, they didn't have the network and they didn't think it was a good idea for me to try to be an artist. And so they were both very community focused. And in time, I thought that architecture would be a great way to give back to the community. And so that's how I started. And, I went to Cornell, as you mentioned. And soon after, I worked with the Port Authority. And it was an amazing program. I mean, it was a training program. I went through all phases of design and construction. But I felt there was something missing. I felt that, there wasn't enough representation of people of diverse background in the built environment. So I knew very intentionally that I wanted to start my own practice. And I thought at the time, like Alex, I did a master's at Harvard, and it's called the Masters of Design Studies with a focus in real estate. And my intention was to get involved with development. But I really didn't know exactly how to do it. I knew conceptually how to do it, so I didn't really understand how to make the connections, as I was studying in those programs. I didn't really know to network with certain people, and so I always thought that to get involved with development, you'd have to have, a good amount of money. And so I never really did that. I never got to it. Mm-hmm. And but we were being noticed for our design talent, and so we got invited to these amazing projects, as you mentioned, the African Burial Ground. But we also collaborated with much larger firms, and so we got these wonderful opportunities. We got to work on the Columbia Business School, which is I think a $5 million project, 500,000 square feet. And so, we got to really understand a very complex development. And, in knowing folks like Aleksandra, mm-hmm. Who also does compliance as part of their services, we were introduced to the work being done at 1 JFK. And so, with our networking, we're able to do some work at the airport, really allowing us some very nice contracts, Mm-hmm. So to your point, yes, real estate development is still a huge challenge. And, for people of diverse background here in the United States, it's access to capital. We know that's the problem. Mm-hmm. So, right. Very happy to continue this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that what spoke to me reading that article was more about understanding from a cultural point of view, right? When you go into a community, understanding the culture of that community and the people who live there before you build. And so I know that culture and ancestry is very important for you, Nicole. And so I'm also curious to know about you, Aleksandra, in terms of bringing that perspective. Do you have that opportunity to bring that perspective to the work that you do?
Not really, because what we do is implement what architects like Nicole do, right? So we make sure that they get built So what our role is as a construction project manager is to make sure that the project is built on time, within budget, safely, and it exceeds the quality that is specified in the construction documents. So we don't really have that opportunity because, as I said, we implement the design of the architects.
Sure.
And I'm sure as a developer, maybe that would be something that we'd be able to do, because then we'd be able to have a vision and then convey that to the architects, and then they could implement that. But so I think that's probably a better question for Nicole.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Nicole if she could give us some more background in terms of her approach. You said that you knew almost immediately that that was what you wanted to bring, and to start your own firm on that philosophy.
Yeah, well, definitely as architects, designers of diverse background, we have a cultural understanding. We have the intuition to know that when we're approaching a project, there are things that are on the forefront of our minds. We want, real success for let's say, community development. What does that success mean? That means that we want really the broad spectrum of the project to be successful, meaning, what's the environmental impact? What's the economic impact? What's the social and wellness impact? What's the cultural impact? How is this development truly going to serve not just the immediate community, but our society, right? Are we just going to develop something, push people out, create some other kind of problem somewhere else? Or are we going to focus and take a collaborative, comprehensive approach where, you're touching all the aspects of society with that development? You're bringing jobs, you're bringing, wellness support, you're bringing, economic vitality,
Right.
So.
And certainly Columbia University, that expansion project has certainly been written about in terms of what its impact has been as it moves into the community in Harlem. But I think certainly something that you have experienced as well, Aleksandra, 25 years, the world was very different back then. The industry was very different back then in terms of the challenges that you faced in moving into this industry. Can you share some of what that was like?
Some of the challenges.
Yeah.
So I think just the fact of being a small business is a challenge, right? You're competing against mega businesses, right? They know each other. Everybody knows each other, right? By definition, typically a business is big has been around for a while, and people know each other, and people do business with people that they know, right? So, as a small business owner, to try to get people to know you, and obviously, it's something that I don't like to talk much about, but we know that it exists, right? That people of color sometimes are not given the benefit of the doubt, right?
Right.
I think it's changing, but that it definitely exists. So you always have to prove yourself. But again, I try to look at things positively, and I know that usually once you've proven yourself, like, people then accept you. And also, again, in the world of construction, women usually, for the longest time, women would, in the construction world, they would be the one that would be only doing the admin, right?
Right.
They didn't have a lot of architects, definitely not people actually building. So that has always been that challenge too. So that now that other people are not accepting you just because they have assumed that you don't know what you're talking about, right? But it goes back to the same thing though. Once you prove yourself, I think then
that builds on your reputation
and things go well. I'm
there.
sure that there's been a few people who, to this day, probably just because I'm who I am, they just say, oh, we're not going to use her, or but I think generally speaking, it's been positive.
Right.
Yeah.
And something else that was brought out in that article around development specifically was the sort of the compliance part of it, right? That projects that were put forth by developers of color were much more looked at and given much harsher review. But at the same time, it went through such a review process that they were able to just, go right through and have their projects approved because they were, reviewed so closely, which again, for me, I'm an elected official in my community of Portchester, we are currently in the midst of redevelopment around the entire community. And so that begs the question, well, if developers of color's projects are being given much more scrutiny, but therefore they can swim through all of those requirements and protocols, then what's happening on the other side of that, right? Are projects that we're seeing maybe not as robust, maybe not as, in terms of offering pilots and things like that, maybe there is some more give and take in that discussion. So, Nicole, I just wanted to also ask you in terms of the challenges that you've experienced coming up now 30 years, your experience in architecture. What were some of those early challenges that you faced?
Yeah, very similar to what Aleksandra was just explaining. You especially 20 years. This is right before Barack Obama, before Black Lives Matter. I think in our generation, those were the two times that we really saw some change. I mean, after Barack was elected, I felt just walking around, let's say the supermarket in neighborhoods that were predominantly white, I felt that people were seeing me more. And, so I think that is dissipating, But one thing that I want to bring to the table is that, I love what you were saying, Joan, about how smaller developers who are Black and Hispanic their projects are more scrutinized, and therefore many times those projects actually perform better. Right, because they've been scrutinized so much through the process. For encouraging younger, smaller developers, I'm realizing that it doesn't take as much as you might think. I did a little bit of research, and I saw some work being done in Detroit. I saw a talk being given by the Commissioner of Urban Planning, and he was explaining that there are properties that you can purchase for like $1,000, $5,000. And, so the opportunities are there, even if the access to capital is limited. You just have to really, really, really push hard and stay focused, So my true calling was architecture and design. So, I got called by design.
Well, let's talk about that, because you both worked or had pieces of or parts of the African Burial Memorial. Tell us a little more about that project.
I'll defer to Nicole because she designed it and knows it inside out.
So it was really just an amazing time in history. When the burial ground was discovered, they were doing excavations really for a government building, the Ted Weiss building, on Broadway. I think it's 290 Broadway. This is, I think, 1991. As they were doing the excavation, they found remains of what turned out to be a burial ground of around 20,000 remains of Africans. The burial ground was just outside of the city limits at the time, and over time it was forgotten, more like neglected and built over. So the fact that Mayor Dinkins, the first Black mayor I think we had in New York, right, was mayor at the time.
That's right.
So we had the right people, at the right places at the right time to make sure that it went through the proper process. They stopped the construction for that portion of the building. They canceled it. They created that part of the land as a national landmark, and project went for competition through the General Services Administration. And we had our concept ready, and we, for the first time, the GSA voted electronically, had the project voted on electronically through the 5 boroughs. So we went through the 5 boroughs, and I had all of my family members, of course, but which at the time, I think did, count for something. Not a
Yes.
lot of people. This is, the early 2000s. And so we won the competition. And, it's really just something that is, sometimes I think about it, I'm just so grateful to have been part of that process, where you can actually go and contemplate. And, the way we executed the monument was such that it's celebratory and just very sacred and sober at the same time. So, I'd love to give a lecture and invite you guys to a lecture to talk about all the
Yeah.
symbolism. We have, you know, a fountain, a reflecting pool, symbolic of, once you go through the interpretive center, which is right next door, which really explains the entire history of the transatlantic slave trade, you really start understanding what slavery was about, and you appreciate, all the people involved. And I also like to remind audiences that, there were all types of slavery systems of all different cultures throughout the world. So I especially like to tell this to, younger children in the city who don't really know and try to kind of wonder why is
Right.
it that people of African descent were made slaves.
Right.
So it's great to have projects like these and exhibits like these that really explain the entire history in a global context,
Yeah,
you know?
there are still
So,
people who don't understand that there was slavery in the North, right? There are still people who are not clear on that in terms of how involved it was. And certainly here in Westchester County, there have been several people who are unearthing, if you'll pardon that sort of pun, the history of slavery here in Westchester County, which for many people is a revelation, right? A revelation. They just were not aware of that. With some of the time that we have left, I would love to hear your points of view, sort of the guidance that you might provide to a young person or a younger person who is contemplating taking a path that you did in your regard, project construction management. Yeah. What sort of words of wisdom and advice might you provide someone?
I think the same advice I would provide, I guess, to my children is that in order to succeed, you have to work hard. You have to make sure that you're ethical, and I'd like to say you have to have the passion, but I think sometimes in life you have to be practical, right? Because your passion could be to paint walls, but you have to have income, so therefore sometimes you
have to do what you have to do.
You have to do what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
So I really think it's working hard and always trying to do your best, right? I think that in itself, and I know that's how actually the DAX stands for Dedicated Accountability, Knowledge, Competence, and Knowledge, because that's our philosophy, and that's my philosophy, and that's what I make sure that everybody in the office, they have that. We do whatever, once we take on a project, we're committed to the project, and we work really hard to make it successful, whether it's working extra hours, whatever it takes, right? So I think to be successful, that is important. So I would tell that to any young person coming through. And then there are going to be setbacks. There are going to be because of our gender, because of our color. There's always going to be, I hate to say always, but I think in the next probably 20 years.
Sure.
There's going to be
Hurdles.
hurdles, but you just have to overcome them. You just have to keep thinking positively, and then things just sort of come together.
Fall
right?
into place.
Yeah, that's what I think.
And how large is your firm? by
We
the way?
currently have 89 employees, and we're hoping to grow. We're hoping to grow, and we're hoping to get more work in Westchester. We're hoping, obviously, same as there's a joke among business owners is when you having a business is like feeding a monster, right? And I'm sure Nicole could say that. You get a project, you have to make sure you have enough people to work on it, and then as the project ends, you have to make sure you get more projects to keep those people,
right.
and then sometimes you get more and more, and then you have to get
That's
more.
right.
It's constantly
feeding the beast.
right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
feeding the beast,
Yeah.
right? So, but we hope that the economy keeps going well,
Sure.
and that we keep getting opportunities. Yeah, that's
Thank you for that. Nicole, words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom in building a company. Well, it's a team effort, right? And so in my case, in architecture, I'm the designer, the design lead. But you really need to think about all the components of what makes a successful business. Okay, so, for anyone who's maybe still in college, you might want to think out in the future, if you do want to have your own business, what types of business partners would you need to accomplish your business goals,
Yep.
So, for example, just the HR portion of it, if you had a COO, from the beginning who is vested in the business, that would help a lot. So you have somebody who is like really on the P's and Q's of that particular aspect of the business.
Right.
If you have a mini CFO, someone who's going to take care of all the financial aspects, maybe start doing some early investment, take some of the savings from the company, grow the money,
Yep.
So that's what I would say. And
Awesome.
since it is still Women's History Month, I know I'm talking too long, but for our young women out there, think of if you're going to plan a family, and for the young men as well, think of the support that you need. Like I'm very lucky. My mom was helping us with my girls when they were young. She's our Mrs. Robinson from the
Right.
Obama house. And so, that all has to be part of a kind of well-calculated, well-balanced plan. So.
Sure. Well, we are out of time, and I just would like to extend my sincerest thanks to both of you for joining me today. It was a
Thank you.
wonderful conversation. Congratulations on 25 years of DAC Consulting,
you.
as well as to you, Nicole. Congratulations on your 30-year career. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, my name is Joan Grosjean-Thomas, sitting in for Bob Johnson at Westchester Culture. Thank you so much for joining us.
Love.